when I was in high school, a lot of years ago, I had the privilege of the sport I participated in was wrestling, and I had the privilege of in my senior year doing fairly well, and I was able to go from the place. You see, this was in Africa. This was not in the U.S. I grew up in the Republic of South Africa. At this point, I was living in a city called Cape Town, and in South Africa, right down on the southern tip of Africa. And as I was there, I had did fairly well. And so the province that we were in, Western Province, I ended up winning Western Province and going to the Nationals. Now, the Nationals in a country with 5 provinces is not quite like going to Nationals in a country with 50 states. We went to the Nationals, and I did okay in the Nationals as well. I was the only, obviously the only American there. This was during apartheid, so there was only whites, and so the population that might have been wrestling and clobbering me was made smaller by the fact there was only whites. There were only 4 million whites in the country at the time. So, you know, so it was not as big hairy deal being at the Nationals, but I got as far as the quarterfinals, and in the quarterfinals I was due to meet the champion from the state called Orange Free State. Now, my team had done a little psychology on the other players, probably because they knew I was useless. I had this bright red tracksuit that had been sent to me from the U.S., and I wore that around the place. And the others, right during that period of time, there was a song on the radio. It was called "The Bloody Yankee," and this song was about this really tough guy called the Bloody Yankee, and he beat everybody up and stuff. So what my team did to this poor naive young man from the Orange Free State is they told him that I was the Bloody Yankee that the song was written about, which is really funny. The only part of that was true is that I was a Yankee. And maybe because my tracksuit was red, I was Bloody Yankee. I don't know. But somehow he believed it. And when it came time for the quarterfinals, they mentioned his name, Orange Free State, so-and-so from the Orange Free State, mentioned him. And I'm standing out there, and he didn't show up. So they raised my hand as the champion, and he didn't show up. So we moved on to the semifinals. In the semifinals, I was 17, weighed 191 pounds. And I met a guy, because in South Africa, you had your wrestling, we went all the way through college, so high school and college were together. I met a guy from the police academy. His name was Blackie Black, or Blackie Schwartz. Schwartz means black. So his name is Blackie Black. I was 191. He was 225. I was 17. He was 22. He pinned me in 15 seconds. He went on to win and then he went on to the Olympics. But the point I'm trying to make here is that in the quarterfinals bout, this young man from the Orange Free State, who might have beaten me handily, because he was given disinformation, he had expectations that were unrealistic, very unrealistic. So he had these expectations that were unrealistic of the damage I would do to him, being that I was the Bloody Yankee, which of course was also disinformation. False, I think your notes and screen say false, but I mean low or inflated expectations can really do damage to vision. If you got the wrong expectations, it can cause defeat one way or the other. So either low or inflated expectations can do serious damage to vision. I decided this morning that I was going to talk to you guys, first of all, about faith as we come to the subject of evangelism. You will find as we go through this first session that without faith, it really is impossible, one, to be saved. Two, it's impossible to truly share Jesus Christ if you don't believe. If we're going ahead with basically with programmatic approach to evangelism as opposed to an approach of faith in coming to evangelism, we really have nothing except another program in the church. Evangelism must be about faith. Now, the two areas I'm going to be talking about related to faith that aren't always brought up is obedience and expectations. And I just need to make it clear that not all obedience is about faith, obviously, right? Not all obedience in life, even to God, is about faith. Some of it is rote, or habit, or expectations of other people. So not all obedience is about faith. But all faith is about obedience. I hope to show that all faith is about obedience. Now, not all expectations in Christianity are about faith. Like you expect to go to church on Sunday, you expect there to be coffee and donuts, and you expect there to be music, and you expect a preacher to stand up and preach. So not all expectations are of faith. But I hope to show you today that all faith is of expectations. That all faith is about expectations. Okay, so not all obedience is about faith, but all faith is about obedience. And not all expectations are about faith, but all faith is about expectations. I hope you're there with me, because that's where we're going to be going this morning. We're going to start off in the book of Hebrews. In fact, for this session, we're just going to be in Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 11, the great Hall of Fame of faith, in verse 6, it makes a very strong and a very important statement. Whoever wrote the book of Hebrews, a lot of people are quite dogmatic that it's Paul, other people think it's Luke. And since the Holy Spirit did not tell us who it was, I don't think it's important. But whoever the author was, starts off here with a very strong statement. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him, or diligently seek him. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. We grow up in a society, the American way of thinking in our society is very, very optimistic. You know, you can do anything. Never say something is impossible. It's kind of ingrained in us growing up. I mean, even as a little child, your teacher lecturing you, you know, there's nothing impossible. If you just put your mind to it, there is absolutely nothing impossible, which, as we know from this verse and as we know from having grown up, there are some things that are impossible. And in this particular verse, the Holy Spirit, God the Holy Spirit, through the author, says that without faith, it's impossible to please him. So we know that there is something that's impossible. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. We'll look at what faith is in a moment, but don't we want to please him? Don't we want to please God? I mean, the church that doesn't please God is what? Irrelevant. The Christian who doesn't please God is what? Irrelevant. Impotent. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. Now back in the text, it goes on and it says, without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God, who comes to God, coming to God, that's an interesting concept, coming to God. And now we know that God draws people to him. And so you have both Christians and non-Christians that come to God. He who comes to God. Now, we're all, according to Madonna, We're all material girls living in the material world. And so because we live in the physical realm, we tend to respond in physical ways. We tend to respond physically because we live in this earth suit, in the skin suit. We live in the skin suit. We respond to temperature and to external stimuli and smells and tastes and sight. We live inside of this earth suit, the skin suit, and we're material people. And so as we come to God, it's difficult because we tend to come to God. We tend to want to naturally come to God in physical ways. We tend naturally to want to come to God in physical ways, in tangible ways. But faith isn't tangible. Faith is invisible. We serve an invisible God. Miracles are invisible. We see the outcome of miracles, but we don't see the miracles. We see salvation. Think about salvation. Think about the miracle of salvation. The miracle of salvation is that a person responds with a sense of need for something they can't see that draws on their heart to feel conviction, to which they surrender, and they've never seen it. They've never seen it. Never seen it. So if everything about coming to Christ is invisible, it is about then coming to Christ is faith. I mean, the Ephesians 2:8-9 says, "For by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves." There's a debate whether it's the grace being talked about or whether it's the faith being talked about there, not of yourselves. And I think both of them are true. Even the faith is not of yourself. God gives you the faith as a gift. See, salvation is invisible and miraculous, and it's a gift from God. And so therefore it's by faith. And so in leading people to Christ, it's by faith as well. It has to be by faith. The children of Israel, after they had just come through Egypt, and they had all the wonders of Egypt, and they crossed across the Red Sea, and then Moses goes up the mountain to communicate with God. And what did the children of Israel do? They get all upset. And so Aaron, Moses' brother Aaron, makes them a golden calf. See, Aaron wasn't trying to say, no, this is a different God. Worship this different God. Aaron was trying to say, no, here's a visible representation of Jehovah. This is a visible representation of Yahweh. And so here he is, worship him. He wasn't trying to create another God. He was just trying to create something that was a visible representation of Jehovah. He was trying to bridge the gap. But God is invisible. The results of his work are visible. But God is invisible. The Christian experience is by faith. Elijah had to deal with the children of Israel later on, where they had turned to Baal and Ashtaroth, and they had become worshippers of Baal and Ashtaroth. And Elijah had to bring them back, and they had all their idols, and they did all their dancing and cut themselves of the priests, the 450 priests of Baal. They did all those things, all these visual things. And then Elijah called on the invisible God, gave him lots of opportunity to show through the altar, the water poured on it, the animals that were on it, and then he called on the invisible God, and the God in a visible way showed his existence. There was never an idol of God in that place, but God showed his existence. The invisible God showed his in existence. See, in this verse, Hebrews 11, those who come to him, we need to know that in coming to him, and as we are bringing people to Christ, in coming to him, we are bringing people to an invisible salvation that has physical demonstration, but it's an invisible salvation. It's an invisible salvation from an invisible God. It's salvation by faith, not by works. I mean, you understand that works would be completely if you're saved by works, it's completely counterproductive to who God is. because he's the invisible God. We have to be saved by faith. The trouble is, in the process of leading people to Christ, sometimes we try and help the process out by giving some visuals, try and make it in some way visual or tangible in some way. The whole name it and claim it movement tries to do that. They try to, and then just as religion in general, just think about churches with incense and bells and altars and saints on the pillars and little all the different things, vestiges of religion that are added to try and make a visible. They're trying to help out our weakness. When the man said, "Lord, help thou my unbelief," the religion tries to be Lord at that point and to help their unbelief by giving them visible vestiges of faith. But don't you see, they're contradictory. Visual vestiges of faith. That's contradictory. Faith is what you can't see. It's your response to what you can't see. And so as we come to the issue of salvation, we need to recognize that, first of all, the person coming to Christ, we need to recognize he's going to be, as I said, accepting an invisible God. It's going to be a miraculous movement of God in his life or her life. If you think back on your own experience of coming to Christ. You see, when we add visual stuff, sometimes we can stunt the growth of the baby believer. They may come to Christ. We stunt their growth by having these other things in the way. So as we as individuals and churches think about evangelizing, we need to recognize that when we are coming to God on the subject of evangelizing, this is something that has to be done by faith. We have to be able to believe God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of those who seek him. He is another way, in my estimation, and in the understanding of most commentaries, another way of representing the I am from the Old Testament, from Moses and the burning bush, as well as the I am as Jesus Christ represented himself in the Gospels. In the Gospels, Jesus Christ represented himself by saying, "I am the vine, I am the light of the world, and the bread of life." And each time he uses the words for I am. So much so that in chapter 8 of John, the Jews pick up stones to kill him because he says, "Before Abraham was, I am." They knew exactly what he was doing. They knew exactly what he was doing. And also in the Great Commission, interesting passage, I'll touch on it a couple times in the course of the day. But in the Great Commission, it says Jesus says all authority. Well, that word authority, if you trace it back, it goes back to the word I am. Its root is in the word I am. All authority, that root is in the word I am. See, the word I am means the uncaused cause, if you are looking at it from the standpoint of the Hebrew, the uncaused cause. So wouldn't all authority have its roots in the uncaused cause? Think about it. All authority would have its roots in the uncaused cause, right? And so it starts off there, the Great Commission, he is, or I am, it starts off with all authority, the uncaused cause, the I am, and then as you go all the way through it, it says, while you're going to make disciples, baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe, and then it says, lo, and once again, you've got the I am there. Lo, I am with you. Lo, the I am with you. So once, just like here it says, must believe that he is, and it relates to the I am, which is always the story of evangelism. You have this Great Commission with bookends of the I am. All authority and the I am is with you. So as we go into this process of evangelism, we need to realize we have the uncaused cause, the creator of the universe, that is completely invested in this whole process of our bringing his name and his character and his image to our world. He's completely invested. He is. And it goes on to say he's a rewarder of those who seek him. What that, in my estimation, is telling us we need to be proactive. We need to be taking action. We need to be doing something. We need to be seeking him. It's not something that just happens, but we'll get there in a moment. So let's now move to verse 1. We said we were going to talk about what it means, where it says faith is. It says, now I've looked at the different translations, and I don't find any clarity in any of the translations, quite frankly, right? So I'll just do the New King James. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Substance of things hoped for. My grandson, when he prays, my grandson Wyatt, when he prays as a 4-year-old, and he has been since about 3. He's getting a little better now. But when he prays, he says, "Dear Lord, I hope we'll have a good night. I hope we'll have a good dinner. I hope you'll take care of Grandma. You know, I hope, I hope, I hope." I'm looking forward to the day where he prays with some expectations, because there is a difference in the concept of hope as we come to the Bible. Now, like take for example the 2015 football season. Peyton Manning became kind of the hero of the 2015 football season, but we were living in the Denver Broncos kingdom during that period of time, and in that period of time, he did fairly well. He did okay. It wasn't going to be a super season, and then he got hurt. And Brock Osweiler took over for 4 games and won 2, lost 2, and one of the 2 was beating Boston and Tom Brady, which was wonderful. And then Manning was brought back in for the playoffs. There was a debate about that, whether it should happen, but they brought him back in for the playoffs. And first of all, even getting to the playoffs with Peyton Manning being hurt, it was just hope. It was just hope against hope. And then game 1, hope against hope, we won. And then next game, hope against hope. Then we find ourselves in the Super Bowl. I mean, just like, wow, isn't this amazing? It is wonderful. Even though we are going to lose, Peyton Manning is going to be able to retire from the Super Bowl. Yay! Hope. Well, of course, yeah. There are people that say, "Oh, I never doubted for a moment," and I don't. Every football team has those people that's they're going to believe whatever. All right. But most of those were saying, you know what, this is, 40%, 30% chance that we'll be able to pull this off. And the defense pulled it off. Bottom line, it wasn't Manning, it was the defense. But see, hope against hope. You see, that's hope. That's hope. The feeling before a football game, the feeling at halftime where you're not totally slaughtered yet. That feeling after the third quarter, there's a spark of hope. Hope. That's hope. Let's hope so. Okay, so the hope that we are talking about here, the substance of things hoped for, here is something that is a lot greater. Now, think about the concept of the precious hope. The precious hope that Jesus is coming again. Now, there's 4 major positions on the subject. Go back to your text. There's 4 major positions on the subject of hope. And in that, there's the amillennial, the return of Christ, and then there's 3 that relate to the 7-year tribulation period. There's the post-tribulational people that believe that, and there are those who believe the mid-tribulational position, and those that believe the pre-tribulational position, which most of us around CB Matrix, that's our viewpoint, is the pre-tribulational position that Jesus is going to return just as at the beginning, as the tribulation period begins, that the first event is going to be Christ's, the beginning of Christ's return. Now, even though there are 4 different positions, and people can say, I hope I'm right, or at least the person who holds my position can say, I hope I'm right because I don't want to go through the tribulation period. But people can say, I hope I'm right in which position I'm holding, but there is nobody who just hopes that Jesus is going to return. You understand the difference? You could hope you're right in your doctrinal position, but there's no doubt that Jesus is going to return. That's the precious hope. The precious hope is not this position, that position, that position, that position, which are just hoping, hope so. But that Jesus is going to return is the precious hope. See, that's the difference there. There's an expectation. There's an expectation that comes with hope. So faith is the substance of the calm expectation. And then it goes on to say the evidence of things not seen. Now, I have a very simple illustration of the evidence of things not seen, and that's your cell phone. You all have them. Your cell phone, I mean, it's just there. Little lights come on. But we say this is the evidence of things not seen. There are signals moving all around us in this room. There's Wi-Fi and there's whatever all moving around us in this room. We say, well, I don't see them. But your cell phone is the evidence of things not seen. Take, for example, give me the weather in Ogden, Utah.
Today, the temperature will range from 55 degrees to 80 degrees.
Did you guys know that? Your temperature is going to range from 55 to 80 degrees. Give me the temperature in Simi Valley, California.
It's 64 degrees right now in Sacramento, California.
Whoops. Well, she doesn't always get it right. You see what I'm saying? See, those signals are clearly here. The Wi-Fi signal is clearly here. The telephone signals are clearly here. This becomes the evidence of what is not seen. All right? So when we look at it and we say, well, you know, I don't really know much about faith. Really? I mean, if even in science and in everyday life we can have something as simple as a cell phone that is the evidence of things not seen. See, this statement here, I believe, and this is the way I like to look at this verse, Hebrews 11:1. Faith is what you expect of and from God. Faith is what you expect of and from God. Think about it. What the actual verse says: the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is what you expect of and from God. Let's talk about expectations for a moment. I had, a number of years ago, Carol and I were working in Southern Oregon, and we had the privilege of ministering to various churches. We went to their churches and did a Thursday night, Friday night, and all day Saturday, and then half a Sunday evangelism kind of reboot for these various churches. I remember two of the pastors, in talking with them, because I would do an interview with the pastor, two of the pastors had never ever led somebody to Christ. In fact, they were hiding behind their expectation that there was a spiritual gift of evangelism. They just wished somebody in their church had it, because sure as tooth they didn't have it. They had absolutely no expectations, and the churches they both came from growing up were churches that had no expectation of people being saved. And you know what? Nobody got saved. What was interesting is these guys invited us to come to their church to be able to teach the people on the subject of evangelism. Why? 4 years before, when we had first come, when Carol and I had first come to Southern Oregon to start a church, I had gone to the association of the church group we were in. I had gone to their association meeting, which was 75 miles north up the coast, and I'd gone to the meeting, and several times I'd attended. It was once a month. The pastors got together, and these pastors would complain about their congregation. They would say how tough it is. They would talk about how their giving was down, and these meetings were serious downers. They were a place for pastors to be able to vent. That's fine. But they were serious downers. So I came to this meeting, and I sat through several months, and it was about the third month I was sitting there, and the guy who was leading it turned to me and said, "Harry, you don't speak up very much in these meetings. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us what you're feeling. Tell us about..." And I said, I really don't think so. And like I'd done other times, I'd tried to bow out. He says, "No, seriously. If you're going to be a part of this, you need to tell us what you're thinking." So I told them, I said, "You know what? I come to these meetings, and all you guys can do is talk about how bad things are, how bad your congregation is, how bad the giving is. I find nothing here that lifts up." Well, that was 4 years before, and we were starting a church. Now this was, so 4 years later, here all those same pastors, every last one of them, were inviting us to come to their church to teach them about evangelism and outreach. Because over those 4 years, they observed, and what happened is people were coming to Christ. They knew I wasn't anything special. They knew it wasn't because of wild and crazy wonderful preaching or anything, but people were coming to Christ as Savior. The church, we had to move 3 times, and we'd had to move twice, and then we bought land, built a building, and we were packing out the building. And once again, it was the same type of community, Southern Oregon coastal community. There was absolutely no reason it should be happening except that I grew up in a context where I expected people to be saved. I grew up in the mission field. I saw people being saved every week, sometimes multiple people being saved on a weekend. I saw lives being changed. I had expectations that things were going to be were different. And as a result of that, we went into ministry with those expectations and the things relating to them. And now 4 years later, here they were asking us to come and help them. You see, expectations is a part of faith. Expectations is a part of faith. You don't have faith if you don't have expectations. And when it comes to salvation, you don't have faith if you don't have the expectations that God is going to save people in your church. If you don't have expectations that this invisible God will invisibly make himself known to visible people and can change their lives tangibly, if you don't have that faith, you're not going to see people saved. It's not going to happen. Now, faith is not just about expectations, but it's also about obedience. Faith is also about obedience, and I want to quickly go to a couple of scriptures in the book of Joshua in chapter 10. Chapter 10 is one of the most exciting chapters in the Bible. And in Joshua chapter 10, we see victory after victory after victory. And verse 8, we see God telling Joshua that he's going to be with him, and he's going to basically fight for him. All right, and nobody will be able to stand before him all the days of his life. And he's basically going to fight for him. And then you read those next verses that immediately follow this verse 8 through verse 14, and you find that even though this next series of battles was because of a failure of theirs with the Gibeonites, even though it was coming out of a failure, God still honored him enormously. But notice, God says, I'm going to fight for you. All right. So instead of Joshua saying, "Well, Lord, if you're going to fight for us, and let's just kind of save energy here. Let's save cost and energy. It's more cost effective. If you're going to do the fighting, we'll just stay right here." Joshua didn't do that. You see, faith requires obedience. Faith requires obedience. Joshua went. And because Joshua went, God fought for them. He threw 100-pound hailstones on their heads, killed more people with the hailstones than the Israelites did with the sword. And then he caused the sun to stand still so they could finish the job. See, what it boils down to, folks, is that if you're going to believe God, you've got to be obedient. If you expect something of God, you've got to be obedient. You've got to do. You've got to get up and go. In Romans chapter 1, in verse 5, and this particular translation here is the ESV, notice it talks about, and I'm not going to get into the context, but it talks about the obedience of faith. For those of you who are teaching, by the way, this works out to be a very good outline. Take this sometime. Give it a try on your own. The obedience of faith becomes an outline for the book of Romans. It's an excellent outline for the book of Romans. Try it sometime. Read it with that in mind. But the obedience of faith. The obedience of faith. Well, you're not going to be obedient if you don't have expectations. Blind, stupid obedience, doing something if you don't have expectations that God's going to be there and that He's going to meet you. And of course, in the book of James, we have the explanation that, show me your faith without your works. I'll show you my faith by my works. Faith without works is dead. Faith without works, faith without action is dead. Faith without action is dead. Think about it. I mean, as you in the book of Hebrews, you have those heroic stories of the faith, where you have, where you have Noah. Noah what? Noah did what? Noah, he built an ark. Noah didn't say, "Okay, God, you're going to lift us above, and you're going to sustain us above the waters, and you're going to sustain some of each life form above the waters. I trust you. I believe you." And just stayed on his knees. No, he didn't. For 120 years, he built an ark. Crazy man, according to the world around him. See, if you believe God is going to do something, then you'll take action. If you don't believe God is going to save, you're not going to take action. Capisce? Or as some say, capiche? I don't speak Italian or anything like it. See, if you're not going to take action if you don't have expectations, but if you do have expectations, then take action. Make a plan, do something, take action. Then, of course, Abraham, what did he do? I mean, he was the knife with his son Isaac was getting ready to start the downslope to his heart. I mean, he took a huge step of obedience, which it says Abraham believed God and was counted to him for righteousness. And of course, Moses in the Red Sea. God deliberately led Moses into a valley that ended at the Gulf of Aqaba, and the Egyptians came up behind them. All that was in front of them was the Gulf of Aqaba. It just happens to be the only part of the Gulf of Aqaba that wasn't 10,000 feet deep. At that particular spot, the Gulf of Aqaba was 1,000 feet deep, and it was a mile wide of 1,000 feet deep, right there. Moses didn't know that. And so Moses, in obedience, led the children of Israel into that spot, and then he did what God said in connection with the water: stand and watch the salvation of the Lord with his rod, and God opened the water. They walked through. God closed the water. See, that's obedience. Obedience based on expectations. Were Moses' expectations that God, after having done all the plagues in Egypt, that God was going to have this slaughter, this bloodbath of Jews in this valley next to the Gulf of Aqaba? No. His expectations is, I don't get it. I don't know if God is going to beam us up and drop us on the other side, what God's going to do, but he had expectations is God is going to do something, because God had said he's going to do something. Expectations, and then you act. Acts of obedience. Because you have expectations that God is going to work. over the years, I have had the opportunity in a number of different situations to be able to put this principle to test, and where you have both obedience and you have faith. And I've been able to have the privilege of putting some of these things to the test in my own life. I remember at one point I had a young man that we had found in the parking lot. First of all, we thought he was a young woman because he was actually a male prostitute that had had a terrible situation, and he was considering killing himself. Our church was next to the bridge, and he was going to jump off the bridge and kill himself in front of a truck. And before he did, he was just sitting there crying late at night on the picnic tables, and we found him there. We took him home, and he lived with us on and off from age. He had his 16th birthday that week with us when we found him, and then he lived on and off with us till he was 22. And but he was marvelously saved. But he had a lot of mental health issues because of the lifestyle, having been given up by his mom, who was a Hell's Angel prostitute, and been a ward of the state, and having been in and out of mental health hospitals, and so he would go into these weird stages. And I came home one night, and he had taken his glasses, and in front of my wife, glasses we had just gotten him, in front of my wife, he had smashed the glasses in his hand. He had pounded his head against the wall, and he had cut himself with the glass from the glasses in front of my wife, which did not make me very happy. So when I got home, I just wanted to put the guy out of his misery. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just kind of human nature pops up first, right? And I just wanted to put him out of his misery. So he had gone into his bedroom, and he was laying under his bed, howling like a dog. He was, foaming at the mouth, so I stood outside his door, and I said, Lord, I have no love for this kid at all. I would just soon step in there and put him out of his misery. And I kept praying. Nothing was happening. He was still howling, so I decided I'd go in. So I went inside his room. I'd asked him for love. And then I just obeyed. I went inside. I didn't at the time. I began to understand when this happened. I just out of obedience, I opened the door, went inside. And when I went inside, I saw his guitarist, so I sat down on a chair, and I played guitar some, and so I started playing the guitar and just kind of fiddling around, working on the song I was working on, and I told him, I said, hey, when you're done doing your doing your puppy dog imitation, and you want to come out from there, we'll talk, all right? So I kept playing, and he howled, he frothed, he howled, he frothed, I played, and after a while he stopped, came out from under the bed and sat on his bed, and we talked, and a couple hours later, we hugged, and we talked about what he had done, and what it boils down to is that I didn't understand that I had prayed for something that already belonged to me, according to the scripture and the fruit of the Spirit. Love already belonged to me, patience already belonged to me, and so I had prayed for it, and I was standing outside, and I didn't get it. I reached out and grabbed the doorknob angry, but the minute I went inside, God gave me peace and patience and long-suffering and all the things I needed, because it was the action that activated my faith. Now, later on in life, I had a couple of situations, and one of them was with a guy that was a was a convicted child molester, two-time convicted, and child molester, and then he had married another woman who had small children, small girls, and so I don't know how I ended up in this counseling situation, but I knew he was coming. I knew that we were going to be talking face to face, and I couldn't bear the thought of meeting with him. So when he came down the hall, I opened my door for him, and I said, I'll be with you in a moment. And so I dashed across the hall, and I said, Lord, this has worked before. You're going to have to give me love, because right now, and I explained to him my very earthly feelings at that moment, explained them to him. Then I got up by faith. I walked back across the hall, opened the doorknob, stuck my hand out and said, Carl, I'm glad you're here. How can I help you? And 2.5 hours later, I realized that God had done the miracle again. You see, because it had happened before, I started having expectations that it would happen. And now I do it regularly if there's ever a situation like that. I know that the fruit of the Spirit and the gifts that God has given us through His Spirit, they already belong to me. They already belong to me. I have to activate them by faith. I say I believe that they're there, but I activate them by faith, by taking an action. It always works, guys. It always works. That which already belongs to you, by faith, you take an action. See, expectations, and the more you do it, you get the expectations, and it becomes more natural. Expectations, acts of obedience. Remember this guy that was very sick. I don't have time. I don't have time to get on with all these stories, but we've seen people healed, and it's one of those things. As a pastor, you don't want to initiate this because you want James 5 is there. It tells you, but you don't want to initiate it because you don't want to come back on yourself that you prayed for somebody that weren't healed. See, we have to let that be God's problem. We have to let that be God's problem. We've had a number of times where there have been wonderful healings. We've seen people come to know Christ, but we have to take action. The whole point of all of this is, all of this is this, that as we come to the subject of evangelism, it's a subject that is about faith. We need to know God well. We need to know Him better. It's about faith. It's about, and through knowing God, we come to expect Him, expect things of Him. 43 and a half years ago, more than that, 44 years ago, I met this young lady, and I had conversations with her, but I had no reason to expect anything of her, much of anything of her. I mean, she was a nice girl. We met at Bible college. It was a nice thing, And then, over a period of time, as I got to know her, I came to expect that she would be the right person, possibly a right person to go through my life with. Then we became engaged, and we went through the process of knowing each other better, and we decided, doing life together, just the expectations would be that this would be very good. So 43 and a half years after the wedding, I now know her so well, and she knows me so well. We know what to expect. See, what it boils down to is knowing God. Walking by faith is knowing God. It's just like when you don't know somebody, as a young man, you meet a young girl. You know nothing about her. You don't know what to expect. 43 years later, you know what to expect. And you know how life and companionship and all of the great things and the tough times and the wonderful times, how they've all worked out. You know how those things are, so you know so much more. The same thing is true in your relationship with Christ. As you know Him, you come to expect. And out of your expectations, you act in obedience. And that obedience results in our being able to see things happen. And this is the essence of evangelism. Without expectations, you and I will do nothing. Without expectations, we will do absolutely nothing as churches to see people saved. Okay, I prefer, as you go to your sessions, I prefer it if you do your work session first. It's not mandatory, but if you do your discussion first and then take your break, is better than if you take your break now. It's very difficult to reel people back in again for the discussion. So it's easier to have your discussion right away while things are fresh, and then take your break. But you work that, whatever works out best for you, and we'll see you back here in 40 minutes. All right?